Okay, hey everybody. So I'm going to double down here on this Zendaya thing. So I posted a video last night um, talking about another video that had typed Zendaya as an INFJ, and it was sort of making the point that the other poster had sort of gone through, found out which functions he thought she had, and I thought again did a pretty good job and compelling case, but then at the end sort of pieced them together as an INFJ, but didn't really look at the polar function or anything like that to try to pinpoint um, you know how the functions are probably stacked together or ordered. And so I was trying to find an example of her showing some sort of TE behavior. So if she were an INFJ, does she have something out there in one of her interviews where she's sort of being self-deprecating about her TE, or talking about an example where she's had sort of a TE type breakdown. But what I found was actually interesting. And instead of finding sort of a TE breakdown, I found more of an FI breakdown in this Vanity Fair questionnaire. And interesting enough, the person who made the original post also sort of watched this video in his typing of her. Um, and so what I noticed, and as I explained in the other video, that she sort of has this hesitancy of answering these questions. And they're all pretty much FI questions, geared at sort of learning the true inner you, and really your FI. Um, and I kind of get the sense that what she's doing is she's trying to find a correct answer, not like the authentic answer or an honest answer, with her FI, but she's trying to find a correct answer, something that everybody would sort of acknowledge as a good answer, right? And it could be she's just sort of being political, and this is just good PR work on her part of not trying to upset anybody. But I also think it's just sort of part of her core personality that so instead of coming up with just sort of the first FI answer that comes to mind, an honest, authentic answer, she really thinks about it and tries to come up with, again, what I think is a correct answer. And you'll see her sort of move around and deliberate. Um, so what I wanted, but before I go on, there's always the chance that, excuse me, maybe these just are hard questions for everybody, right? And maybe I'm, reading too much into it, where, I'm making this argument that it shows that she's Fi polar because she's having difficulty with it. But maybe everybody has difficulty with it, right? Maybe everybody has a hard time answering these questions because they're personal, or you're trying to find, a good answer, or you're, on the hot seat. This is going to be watched by millions of people. Excuse me, et cetera, et cetera. And so I went back and I watched other videos of other people doing this. And you will see that there's a wide spectrum of people in their responses. And I'm going to show sort of I'm going to contrast Zendaya's responses to that of Dan Levy, who also did it. Dan Levy of Schitt's Creek and Eugene Levy's son. And he has zero problem answering these questions. Which to me sort of indicates that he's got probably pretty high FI, front stack FI. And it also sort of addresses the question of whether this is just something that's hard for everybody to do. Okay. So I really do think that there's a spectrum of people, some people who could do it pretty easily and some people who have difficulty with it. And it's probably tied to where their FI is. So let's watch a few of these questions with Zendaya, and I want you to just sort of notice how she's struggling and she's sort of fidgeting, and you can tell she's getting frustrated. She's trying to be political and nice, but it's pretty obvious she's getting frustrated. So let's watch this.
um, Sam Levinson.
Who is your hero of fiction?
Hero of fiction. I don't know.
Which historical figure do you most identify with?
I don't know. I have this thing. See, I'm going to try to explain myself. We can just move on. I'll explain myself later.
Who are your heroes in real life?
My siblings, who are much older than me. I'm the youngest. My grandmothers, my little nieces and nephews even. Yeah, corny answer, but yeah, my family.
What are your favorite names?
My favorite names?
Sorry to jump in here. Notice how she sort of was, she said, oh, that's a corny answer, but whatever. So it's almost like, again, she is thinking about it as there's correct answers here, right? And if you give a quote unquote corny answer, that might be seen as incorrect. And she's sort of, self-criticizing herself here. So anyways.
It's funny. I don't know. I'm really bad at picking things, which is what I was going to get into later.
Okay. Look at her just frustration. She's playing with her hair. She's not really looking at the camera. You can tell she's in deliberation mode and she's getting frustrated. And this is just a simple question. What's your favorite name? Right? And I think if this question were asked earlier before she started getting frustrated, maybe she'd have an easier time answering it. But we're on question number 31, so she's already had 30 of these types of questions. And you can tell she's just getting really annoyed with them.
What is it that you most dislike?
I don't know, bad people? I don't know.
Again, she's looking for, affirmation that her answer is correct here. Not, her honest, authentic answer, but, bad people. I don't know. Do you agree? Is that the right answer?
People are racist? Shitty people.
What is your greatest regret?
I don't have one. I don't have a regret. Thankfully, I try to do things that I won't regret. I always find that everything literally happens for a reason. It takes whatever that instance was to learn from it, honestly.
Okay, so here, okay, I could buy that. But notice how she had to explain it, right? In this sort of TI type of explanation, rather than just saying, I don't have any regrets.
How would you like to die?
Oh, I don't like answering those kinds of questions.
What is your motto?
My motto is, don't be an asshole.
So that concludes the questionnaire.
So I want to show this reflection part again, just for those who might not have seen the first video.
How was that?
How was it? Actually stressful. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's really hard for me to pick one thing. I don't have a favorite movie. I don't have a favorite color. I don't have a favorite food. I never have. My whole life, I never was like, oh, this is my favorite color. Or, this is my favorite food as a kid. It's kind of a personality trait of mine, is the inability to quite specifically choose anything.
Okay, so here we have somebody, in my opinion, clearly saying, hey, that one cognitive function that tells you what you value and what what your favorite things are and what your personal values are? Well, yeah, I don't use that a whole lot, right? So, in my opinion, you're not going to find, well, let's just say it would be very, very hard to find her addressing another cognitive function that directly and saying, hey, I don't do that, and so it's a pretty good chance she's Fi polar. Maybe you can make the argument it's, just sort of inferior backstack or something, and, she's having a bad day or something. But I think if you piece it all together, Fi polar, probably ESTP. I don't really get the ENTP vibe from her. I get much more of an ESTP vibe. For those of you who are familiar with her, I mean, she's been acting and dancing and everything since she was a little kid. And, that just sort of screams SP to me. Okay. So let's compare her to somebody else. So again, I was concerned maybe, these are just really tough questions for anybody, and let's not read too much into it. Um, and, so let's see how other people do and see if there's sort of a spectrum here. So this is Dan Levy, Eugene Levy's kid from Schitt's Creek.
Who is your hero of fiction?
Mary Poppins.
Which historical figure do you most identify with?
Whoever hasn't been canceled yet.
Okay, just notice how quickly he responds. Notice how he's not looking around, deliberating, trying to think of, the right answer. He really is just giving his authentic, honest response here.
Who are your heroes in real life?
Great teachers.
What are your favorite names?
Eugene, Deborah, Sarah, and Redmond.
What is it that you most dislike?
Generally speaking, arrogance.
What is your greatest regret?
Not respecting myself enough in my teens.
How would you like to die?
On a beach, mid-laugh with some friends.
And finally, what is your motto?
There is no such thing as this is how it's done.
That concludes the questionnaire.
Okay, so hopefully you see a pretty clear contrast between Dan Levy and Zendaya. And I invite you to watch all of Dan Levy's interview, because it really is just sort of seamless. And it's funny because at the end he's kind of self-deprecating and he's like, oh yeah, that was tough letting you in, and I think it's tough for anybody to, let people into what you're feeling and what you're thinking. But from a cognitive function perspective, I mean, he had zero problem processing this information and providing a response. And, I mean, you can't really make any conclusion about type based just off of that, but he gives me really INFP vibes. Is very in tune with these inner FI questions, and also has some pretty creative spins on them, which to me suggests some NE there. But, again, if the point is you got to find a polar function, I can't really definitively say what type he is or anybody else that does well on this. So there is a spectrum here. There are a couple of people that, like, for example, Maya Rudolph from Saturday Night Live, she does this. And she talks about, before she starts, she talks about being really nervous and how she doesn't like talking about herself and everything. But when she's actually doing the responses, she does fine. Maybe not as smooth as Dan Levy. Dan Levy is clearly, in my opinion, the smoothest. But she does fine, and she's not, you don't see this sort of breakdown or frustration that you saw in Zendaya. So Maya Rudolph, I mean, her FI is probably backstack, probably second, maybe, or I'm sorry, probably sixth or fifth or something, where she doesn't really like using it, but she can, if pressed to do it. And so that's a good example of, it's not necessarily polar, but it's probably not front stack, and she really doesn't like doing it, but she can do it if she has to. Another good example of somebody who did well, I thought, was Spike Lee. I'd recommend watching his, and his is interesting because there's a couple of responses that he doesn't want to give. You can tell that he knows the response, that he came up with one in his head, but he just doesn't want to give it. And so it's kind of like him playing 4D chess with FI, where he's got the FI response, but he also he has enough FI awareness that he probably shouldn't put it out there and tell people. And And so his is really interesting. And again, there's this smoothness to it. The way that he responds. Actually, let me see if I can bring it up here. The way that he responds.
They know us a lot of what I wanted to do, whatever that particular project was.
What is the trait you most deplore in yourself?
I think I have very, very short fuse. And so I've had to work on myself.
What is the trait you most deplore in others?
I want people to be the best they can be.
Which living person do you most admire?
I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not going to put it down to one person.
What is your greatest extravagance?
My season tickets for the orange and blue, the New York Knickerbockers.
What is your current state of mind?
Right now, shit is crazy.
Okay, so you get the point. He's pretty smooth in his responses. Isn't really fidgeting around, looking around, trying to find, the correct answer. He's just giving you an authentic response. Aquafina, she also does.
This feels like
pretty
therapy,
solid job.
guys. Where am I?
Now, notice she's complaining about it. She thinks it's kind of odd and really personal, but when you actually watch her responses, she's got no problem.
Selfishness.
Which living person do you most admire?
Man. Oh my God. Oh, Alf?
What is your greatest extravagance?
It was what I later found was a counterfeit purse that I got on the Real, which is
Yeah, she does seem kind of frustrated answering these. It's probably backstack FI, if I had to guess, but I don't really know. I'm not really too familiar with her, but I did notice that it was easier for her to answer some of these questions than it was for Zendaya. So, okay, so I'd recommend going through these because it's an interesting experiment because they're all the same questions, and you get very different reactions and responses from people, and it gives you a little bit of sense of where FI is falling in their cognitive function stack. So enjoy and talk to you next time. Bye.